Hello and welcome everyone. Today I'm going to show you how to deploy the models that you've created. In the last video, I've showed you how to create a pipeline, and the video before I've showed you how to create an automated ML. So today I'm going to be working with my automated ML. I'm going to show you how to deploy that in a service. So before I go ahead, I wanted to make sure you understand the difference between the compute instance. With the compute is basically it's your hardware, as I said before. It's your computation power. It's basically the hardware or the workstation that you work with. The computation power is one of the key advantage you get from cloud-based machine learning, which is basically the Azure. Or this Microsoft ecosystem. Choosing the correct computation resources that are available for you for your machine learning experiment is important. We have three to four different types of machine learning instances or compute types in the Azure environment. The first one is the compute instance, which basically the single computer. If you don't want to spend the time in setting up your local computer for doing the ML experiments, or you want to leverage the GPUs or powerful CPUs for doing your experiment, Azure Compute Instance offer a fully managed virtual machine loaded with the most of the essential frameworks, libraries for performing machine learning. So you don't need to do a lot of, back-end work on downloading things and, configuring things and stuff. So it's all done for you in the Azure. And this is why it's one of the great ones, the great ideas. So people worked with AI before or machine learning before who used Jupyter Notebook, who used Google Colab and so on and so forth, or TensorFlow. They would understand what do I mean by the back-end work, basically preparing your device before. So before you actually start working on machine learning projects. So this is already done for you. So this is the instance. It's literally creating a parallel computer, and like a virtual computer that you work with. It's 100%, most of the time more powerful and more prepared than any device you can have at home if you don't want to put the time. You can access your compute instance using different ways. You can access it through the Jupyter Notebook, which I'm going to show you today in our deploy video. Jupyter Lab, obviously it's all under the Microsoft Azure ecosystem. And this is these two ways, the Notebook or Jupyter Lab is the all-time favorite for the most data scientists basically using it. Some people would use R. So for you folks out there who are using R, you can access it again through RStudio, which is still under the ecosystem. You can access it through the SSH as well, which is again supported by the ecosystem. But the second type of computer is a computer cluster. It's basically more than one computer. You've got a compute cluster, computer clusters, or computers cluster. You can have multiple clusters. You can have one cluster. You can have multiple computers, obviously in a cluster. This is what we call cluster. So the compute cluster are different from the compute instance with their ability to having obviously more than compute node. These compute nodes, which is basically your instance, can be created with our desired hardware configuration. You can have similar configuration, you can have different configuration, and so on and so forth. Why have more than one node? Why would you need a cluster? That comes with the ability of using parallel processing for computations. Working with machine learning will basically be based on the big data you have. That's why you need more computational power. If you are going to do basically hyperparameter tuning, GPUs based on complex computations, several machine learning runs at once, you may have to create a computer cluster. Say if you are running a automated machine learning experiment, which we have done, we are going to deploy today with Azure ML, you must have a compute cluster to perform the computations. And you will have to create a compute instance to deploy it. When selecting the node configuration, you can either go to CPU or GPUs based on your basically preferred properties, or based on your experiment. We have the third type we have here is the inference cluster. There are two options to deploy your Azure machine learning, and the inference cluster most likely will be created when you want to deploy your machine learning application. There are two options to deploy the Azure Machine Learning Web Service or services as a REST endpoint. We're going to be playing with this today. You can use an ACI, which is the Azure Container Instance, or use the AKS, which is the Azure Kubernetes service. Probably pronounced it wrong, but it's a very weird word. I can't even remember it off the top of my head. So the AKS or the ACI, deploying the REST web service on the ACI is good for testing the deployment, and uses an AKS would be, or using AKS would be the to-go-to for production level, especially if it's large deployment. And the fourth and not very sort of like common to be used is attached compute. This is basically a machine learning, is not limited for doing computations or compute clusters. You can attach Azure data bricks, basically data lake analytics, and so on and so forth, for your workspace. So this is all what I wanted to say about the compute. It's very important to keep these information in mind. So today as I said, we're going to deploy predictive services. The Azure Machine Learning, you can deploy the service as a container, as I said, ACI, or as a AKS cluster. So the first thing we're going to do is I am here on my Auto AI. And if I go back a bit, probably you get this. I am going to use my Auto AI experiment. Click on there. I'm going to just launch my studio. And then I've already have my run. My experiment runs. If I go to my Auto ML, I'll find my last experiment, which we have created together and we've run together. So it's completed. Obviously, if you didn't run it, it has to be completed. You need to run it and get your results. But I'm okay with this run here. I'm going to click on it. You look at your module, your models. So I only have one model, but typically you have more than one model if you follow the instructions on the lab that you already have as part of your course. I'm going to click on my module. I'm happy with that. Obviously, you can check other things, your model. There's a lot of things you can do with, but I'm only interested in this. On my module, which is successfully completed, I'm going to click deploy. I'm going to create a name for my deployment. I'm going to just call it the predict rentals, because this is what I want to do with my thing, is predict rentals for a week, say, or something. I'm still working with the bicycles, with the cycling prediction bike rental company thing. So it's just description here and the name, basically, whatever it is. But just notice that you only allowed a lowercase for some reason. Uppercase is not acceptable in the name. Compute type, you use the Azure, like you can use either the container or the AKS or ACI. I'm going to be using this because it's more the one that you want to go for. You don't need to go to the other one. You need to enable your authentication. If you don't enable your authentication, then it's not going to ask you to authenticate yourself. Enable the authentication gives it more kind of like Yes. Okay. It gives it more safety, makes it safer. And then I'm going to deploy. And that will take a couple of minutes. You'd see the status successfully model successfully triggered, running, and it is successful. When it is successful, then obviously I ran this before. That's why it happened this quickly. But it could take a few minutes. I will click on the successful part. It's a successful link. I'm going to have the attributes of my experiment. My rest point, endpoint is here. If you go to consume, you will get your rest endpoint and your primary key, which you need for your code. Now, the second thing I'm going to note these, what I'm going to do is you have two different options. The first one is just have a notebook here. Yeah, like in here, and copy this rest point into it, and copy your primary key into it. Okay, I'll let you know why. Or you can just open another tab, okay, of Azure thing. Now, opening another tab of Notebook, because this is where we're going to use and deploy our REST API. So, okay, so I've noted that. What I'm going to do, I've already got everything copied here. So what I need to do, I need to go to my notebook. Obviously, I have a notebook here, which doesn't matter. I'm just going to create another one. I create a new file. I'm going to give my file name. I'm going to, again, just call it predict rentals. I'm going to the type is notebook. You can overwrite if it does exist, but I'm creating a different one, or actually I'm just going to create that. I'm going to say overwrite. I'm going to create. So it's going to overwrite my rental. Okay, so in here now, my predict rentals is empty. In the lab that is given to you by the in the Learn, Microsoft Learn, it will give you some code. Copy and paste that code. Don't really worry about the code itself, because the point is not it's going codeless. It's something that you can play with later if you're interested, and we're going to touch upon it in a future sessions maybe. But it's not about the code really. All what you need to learn is, because this would work with any database, that as long as you know how to use it. What you need to do is change your endpoint. Basically, you need to replace it with your endpoint, which is basically your REST code. I'll copy that, and then I'll paste it here. And then I need to replace my key, and this is my key. Just gonna copy it and paste it there. I'm gonna save this. I'm gonna save this, and then make sure that you have your correct compute, which is the Auto AI instance. If you didn't create it, then you can go to your computes and create it there. So notice that in the cluster, I've created a cluster, and for my deployment, I created an instance. And it's literally similar to same configurations that I used for my cluster. The same thing, we've done this before. So you need an instance here. If you didn't have it, then go and create a compute instance, and then it will run no problem. So what I'm gonna do now is run it. Oh no, I don't want to stop the compute. Okay, so that should be it. And then I am going to run it. If I run it, it will give me 5 days predictions. So prediction, the first day prediction was 600 rentals, 500, 800, and so on and so forth. And obviously, to deploy a model from your experiment, you always look at the best model. You create a number of them, and you try to go for the best model. So this is all for the deployment, and it's basically very similar to in any model that you create, whether that was automated ML or using the designer, creating pipeline. It is basically the same in all of these. I hope this helps. If you have any questions, let me know. Take care and see you in the next one. Bye.